Tanares RPG 5e game Masterless mode was originally called Solo mode. This got me interested in tabletop RPG, and I have started some reading about the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, even though I have never played the genre before. Conceptually, I have been convinced that solo playable 5e game can be viewed as an adventure board game with complex game rule. Yet I read many experienced D&D players strongly speaks against solo play D&D. Am I missing something major? The only way to find it out is actually try playing it myself. So today, I am sharing my own experience of actually playing the first 5e game, which of course is in solo mode. I have specifically ended up using D&D Starter Kit campaign with Tanares RPG characters. This recording became quite a bit longer than I had originally anticipated, so I have decided to divide this up into 4 sections within the episode. If you are only interested in part of my journey, feel free to skip to the corresponding section, which is linked below. There were quite a few options to investigate before deciding how to start 5e for the first time, especially as a solo player who is looking for the board game type experience. In this first section, I will talk about my research journey, explaining how I ended up choosing the D&D Starter Kit. The second section is the preparation phase. Once I have determined to use D&D Starter Kit with Solo Play Guide, there were quite a few more choices I had to make for preparing the actual game setup. In the third section, I will be talking about my first encounter with highlight moments from the game. In fact, I actually jotted down this section while I was playing the game, so you will hear some mistakes and struggle I make as a first-time player. The last part is my impression after the very first 5e game in solo mode, of course, from the board gamer's perspective. Dragori Game has made sample digital book available for tabletop RPG gamer, including short adventure sample. I have immediately downloaded them and started to read all 3 sample books. When I got to the adventure book, one paragraph caught my attention immediately. The adventure is designed for characters starting at level 3. But you can have them start at first level and go on few adventures before beginning the first chapter. From the board gamer's perspective, this means this adventure book starts at the level 3 character. I'm used to seeing games usually starting at level 1, although non-level 1 start is not uncommon in D&D campaign books. This made me believe there is clear assumption that players are familiar with 5e rule before getting started with Tanares RPG Adventure. So even though this is what I really want to play, I had to find something else as a beginner. There are many online forum posts from D&D players stating D&D is not meant to be played solo. This is a bone of contention. One thing I found out is that solo play 5e is certainly not unheard of, and there are many players out there, and in fact it sounds like early ages of D&D even came with solo adventure. After doing a couple weeks of research about solo play 5e, I basically saw 3 general approaches for beginners like myself who have never played 5e. I read a few times people recommending entirely different tabletop RPG. The name I read the most is Iron Throne. Iron Throne has free digital downloads, so if you are interested, you can certainly give a try. However, the main issue for me here is that I am not looking for a solo playable tabletop RPG. I am looking for most versatile new adventure board game experience. There are actually solo playable, friendly 5e campaign books available for purchase on Dungeon Masters Guild. For instance, publication from 5e solo game books list 37 items at the time of this recording. In fact, I have purchased the first of the series myself. I think I may eventually play this while I wait for Tanares RPG, but as I skimmed through the first few pages, it was clear the game still assumed prior knowledge and experience about the 5e system. The third option is something I came across the last. This is basically a system, rule, or guide that make routine tabletop RPG into Dungeon Master less playable. This sounded great because this seemed to open up all the available Dungeons & Dragons official series for me to potentially play as a solo player. This includes the official D&D starter kit that is written specifically for players who play D&D 5e for the first time. There are many options for a solo play guide. Some of the highly rated guides I came across during my online research include Mythic Role-Playing, Mune, the Dungeon Oracle, the Solo Adventures Toolbox, Solo Adventures Guide, D&D Solo Engine, and others. Obviously, I have not tried all as there are so many to choose from. I have first started with free one, which is Mune. This guide looked like written for creating own adventure. I needed even more basic. So I purchased Solo Adventure Resource, the Dungeon Oracle. This 11-page digital book felt enough for me to get started. I have decided to play official D&D starter set because it is the official adventure written for new D&D players, including new Dungeon Master. This kit is listed as an ideal for a group of 4 to 6 players, with set including 64-page adventure book with everything that Dungeon Master needs to get started, 32-page rulebook for playing character level 1 through 5, 5 pre-generated characters with character sheet, 6 dice. One issue with the starter set contained adventure for solo player is that it is balanced for 4 level characters. Controlling each character in 5e system is much more sophisticated than the typical adventure board game characters. So controlling 4 is generally not preferable for the solo player, and absolutely not for beginner. Here, the Dungeon Oracle guide came in handy. It contains a player number conversion table, which is supposedly based on the official D&D Dungeon Master's guide. Using the Dungeon Oracle's conversion table, I have decided to go with 2 level 3 characters. The primary reason for choosing this option over 1 level 4 character is that I thought 2 characters would keep team-based tactical element that 1 character otherwise won't be able to do, such as death saving throws. Besides, this choice actually conveniently allowed me to use Tanares RPG Player's Guide sample containing pre-generated characters as they are all level 3. The starter kit includes stripped down version of D&D Basic Rulebook. The basic rule guide itself is free online, but it has 180 pages in comparison to the 32-page booklet on the starter kit. At this point, I have already read actual basic rule and even player's handbook myself, but if I were to do all over, I'd just start with rulebook that came with starter set. I would also recommend checking some of YouTube channel like Don't Stop Thinking How to Play Dungeons & Dragons 5e YouTube series and Handbooker Helper YouTube series. Although being able to create your own character in 5e system is intriguing, it is not an easy process. Relatively speaking, Player's Handbook devotes first 6 chapters out of 11 total chapters to the character creation related materials. At this point, I want to dive right into the game and there are still a lot to learn. I've decided to use pre-generated characters, specifically from Tanares RPG sample book. I have chosen Dragonblade, Gaknak. As a support, I thought having a healer is a good idea, so I chose Emboro. There are a lot these characters can do. Therefore, unlike other tabletop adventure games like Gloomhaven or Arena the Contest, not everything is depicted in attack cards. it is suffice to say each character has their own sets of gameplay rules. So I read the Tanares RPG Player's Guide corresponding to the Dragon Blaze section a couple times. The third page of the Dragon Blaze character sheet summarized gameplay-related features and traits for the easier referencing, but even then, you can see how much materials there are. At this point, I wanted to dive right into the game, so I have decided to not read much about Emboro and save that for a future encounter, because I was fairly certain for the very first encounter I won't need healing spell. Although D&D can be played without a grid map and miniatures, this won't feel like a board game. So as a board gamer, map and miniatures, or at least tokens, are essential. However, the D&D Starter Kit adventure did not come with pre-printed grid map. In fact, the first encounter having no real terrain element related effect, they did not even draw the map in the book. At this point, I had two options of setting up the board game type grid and miniatures, or tokens. One is physical, using my other board game's grid and miniatures. The other is virtual, using one of virtual tabletop simulator platform. I chose the virtual option. The main benefit of this approach is many data tracking involved in 5e can be automated, so as a starter, there is less likely chance of me to make mistakes. Just like everything else to this point, selecting which virtual tabletop simulator platform to use is yet another tough multiple choice question. The options I came across are Roll20, Foundry VTT, Fantasy Ground, and Above VTT. Since I have purchased digital books from D&D Beyond website, I started to play around with the free account character and encounter creation and tracking tools on it. With this, Evolve BTT came to the first choice. This is a free Google Chrome extension-based virtual tabletop simulator that directly integrates with D&D Beyond. Unfortunately, importing homebrew contents like Tanares RPG material into D&D Beyond, hence Above VTT, felt unnecessarily time-consuming, and I thought it was not something I would like to keep doing for future materials. So I have personally ended up purchasing Foundry VTT. Foundry VTT required $50 one-time purchase. It involved some learning, but there was helpful Foundry VTT basic YouTube guide by Encounter Library. One benefit of setting up solo campaign using virtual tabletop simulator is you are controlling everything, so you don't need to worry about hiding enemies, setting lighting, or background music. You can straight focus on putting characters and monsters. It basically required much less skill for simulator. Finally, after making all the research with multiple choices, this is exactly what I have chosen as the first time 5e solo player. Playing platform is Foundry VTT. Campaign book is Dungeons & Dragons Starter Kit. Character sheets, Tanares RPG Player's Guide, pre-generated characters. One of the reasons I went with Starter Kit is that I read this adventure dives right into the meat of the D&D, while it does not assume you know anything about D&D, so it explains everything. The adventure began with explaining how the adventure starts. The story narrative is mixed with instruction to Dungeon Master and an actual story narrative. As recommended by Dungeons Oracle booklet, I have kept reading line by line until I saw the first combat encounter, which was actually just in a few paragraphs from the beginning of the page. The next paragraph started in the unlikely event that the goblin defeats, so I stopped reading here because I felt it will spoil me the consequence, and I thought the presented material from this point on will be irrelevant until I finish the battle with goblins. Even though I got both physical and digital version of this adventure, one thing I liked about the digital format is that everything is hyperlinked to relevant rulebook section. For example, This very first combat starts with a surprise encounter mechanics of 5e rule. I can click the word highlighted, hyperlink, to look how it exactly works. In D&D, normally Dungeon Master controls the monsters. However, in the solo play, I need to control monsters. This is a familiar concept to me, despite I have never played tabletop RPG. It is analogous to the other adventure board games like Arena the Contest or Gloomhaven. The difference here is that in those games we have an explicit guide of how to control monsters, which is often has some random element by means of monster AI deck. Since D&D Adventure here is not made to be played without Dungeon Master, there is no monster AI. In the case of this very first encounter, all I have is one sentence talking about the general tactics. When the time comes for the goblins to act, 2 of them rush forward and make melee attacks, while 2 goblins stand 30 feet away from the party and make ranged attacks. Even when monsters are controlled by Dungeon Master, there will be variation of the play, with some Dungeon Masters a great, masterful, thematically appropriate tactician, and others may be a bit more monotonous gameplay style. In fact, there is even a book talking about how to generally control different D&D monsters for Dungeon Masters. I'm sure some of the solo play engine rule guide have some suggestion here, but at this point I have decided to just make up my own rule for the simplicity, especially I know my first encounter involves goblin and I am already given 2 are melee and 2 are ranged attackers. With this guide, each goblin essentially has only one type of action it can take. The monster AI rule I decided to use is to follow Arena the Contest monsters' basic attack strategy, which is very straightforward but I believe reasonable. The combat began. Goblin's movement was easy. I just chose couple to melee attack and the other 2 to go 6 squares away from my characters and perform ranged attack. Upon completion of the first round, I had 1 goblin down, and most interestingly, I got my red dragon spirit out. Since one of the special power of Dragon Blade class is ultimate attack, which unlocks when 3 consecutive attack uses different types of draconic power, I have decided to keep track of this using built-in condition icons that looked similar to the official draconic power icons. I thought I did a fair amount of homework by reading basic rulebook a couple times before this first game, but immediately on my first turn during the Embolos attack, I got stuck because I wasn't sure what the keyword versatile meant. So I went to basic rulebook and searched versatile. The versatile, this weapon can be used with 1 or 2 hands. A damage value in parentheses appears with the property. The damage when the weapon is used with 2 hands to make a melee attack. Now reading this raised another question. I wondered if versatile benefit can be used with a shield equipped status as my Emboro does. According to some Reddit post, despite everyone was in agreement that you need to take off the shield to open up the 2 hands for versatile attack, there were disagreement about doffing a shield, whether it is an instant process or costing an action. I personally decided to go with the official rulebook, where it states an equipping a shield takes a full action. Now the excitement starts with draconic power. Empowered Dragon's Revenge states, if you or an ally within 15 feet of your spirit takes damage from an enemy within 60 feet of your spirit while the spirit is empowered. Well, I think I put my spirit a bit too far initially, so I pretended it was placed a bit closer. With proper positioning, Dragon's Revenge power deals straight 1/6 size die damage. Since missing attack felt common in my current situation, I thought this was pretty good ability. In the 5e combat system, attacker rolls first to determine if the roll number is equal to or higher than the target armor class. If the attack was determined as a hit, then you roll for the amount of damage separately. After going through the full 3 rounds, I have had a total of 6 attack opportunities using my characters. I had only 2 successful hits. That's 33% success rate and felt a bit too low. The Goblin has armor class of 15. With 20 sided die, this means only 1 in 4 attacks succeeds. However, this roll is augmented by modifier conditions such as proficiency bonus and ability bonus. So I looked back the character sheet and also log of what I have rolled so far. It turned out the way I entered the data in Foundry VTT for my characters did not add the bonus. For instance, Emborrowed should have got +4 to all hit rolls. I see Foundry VTT was only adding +1. This was certainly another learning lesson. With +4 hit, 25% hit probability now goes all the way up to 55%. This seems still slightly lower than the typical sweet spot of 60 to 80% success seen in other tabletop games, like drawing a specific card in the Magic the Gathering during the game when full copies of the card is included in the 60 card deck, or attack success rate in the Arena of the Contest. But I believe this is due to my characters at still lower tier levels, and sense of character development in D&D is a significant part of the game, so it must be starting low here. With the roll log, I could have adjusted all attacks by reviewing the log, but I have decided to just carry the game without doing so, as I felt I could still beat this introductory encounter. Now that real excitement comes in. Since this is the 3rd turn of Dragonblade, I can use its ultimate power. This is like a combo mechanics. By using 3 different categories of draconic power, you unlock the ultimate effect of the 3rd attack. In my case, I have saved up Force Wave by just pure luck, but felt probably the best one to use ultimate power in this scenario. This special attack is thematically very cool. This power basically states Draconic Spirit is even capable of alleviating the missed attack. This was my very first use of the saving throw mechanics. I got 1 of 2 targets successfully hit and killed it. 2 more to go. I really like the Empowered Dragon's Revenge power. This power ignores attack roll, even the saving throw. Even before my character got their turns, Dragon's Revenge killed the 3rd goblin. Now, this is where the importance of reading entire encounter description before it starts as a solo player comes into play. Instead of killing the last goblin, this quest ends after the 3rd goblin because the 4th one runs away. So I have successfully completed my very first Dungeons & Dragons 5e combat using Tanares RPG characters. Overall, the game flowed exactly as I expected. In fact, even with this very first encounter, I have felt the game mechanics are far more versatile than I've ever played. For example, after the successful completion of the Goblin Arrow encounter, I now started reading ahead, and the very next sentence said, the characters might capture 1 or more goblins by knocking them unconscious instead of killing them. Once it regains consciousness after a few minutes, a captured goblin can be convinced to share what it knows. Even it may seem minor here, I thought this is very interesting. I am used to just defeating enemies on the board in the adventure board games. If there was an option to capture, the way I have experienced is after completion of a quest, you are given 2 choice questions, like do you like to kill the goblin or capture? In case of 5e, knocking a creature out is actually official part of the rule. This means I can technically do this in any encounter. Basically, I felt 5e based adventure board game is definitely possible and has a huge potential as long as the game has a proper game aid and design. Now, what are the proper game aid design? Obviously, this is my personal opinion, But these points are where I felt playing Dungeons & Dragons adventure game design is suboptimal to be experienced as a solo playable board game. Lack of monster AI, quest narrative tone, rule complexity, many data tracking, and stats. The fortunate part of these points are that essentially all could be corrected by supplements rather than changing the 5e core rule itself. Since this whole journey started with Tanares RPG, let's take a look of how Tanares RPG GM-less mode add-on addressing these points. Dragori Games will be making monster AIs. Unlike generic AI for all or most of common monsters, Dragori Games has confirmed that they will be using unique strategies for each monsters. In fact, they have even stated the strategy would change based on the encounter. This sounds like a student answer. In case of starter kit, I actually appreciated the way it is written because writing style for new learning dungeon master felt as a good teaching material. However, once I familiarize myself with basic rules of the 5e, spoiler-free narrative written for adventurer's perspective would be preferable for better immersion. This is yet another element I am familiar with in other adventure board games, including Dragori's its own game, Arena the Contest. This is the exact reason why Tanares RPG is making a separate booklet and card deck for Game Master-less mode. Another A grade here. 5e is undoubtedly the most rule-rich tabletop game I have played or seen. Individual rule points are not necessarily difficult, but there are a lot of options in this game. As such, remembering every part of rules seems impossible for the most. I ended up purchasing the starter kit adventure in both physical and digital format, but during this play round, I used digital version since my whole setup was digital. This turned out to be a really good idea for a starter like myself. With the game being digital, all game rules and keyword were clickable or hover over hyperlink for quick and easy rule lookup. Since Dragori Games will not be including 5e rule itself in their content, probably due to licensing reason, I don't think there is much Dragori Games can do in this regard. I just envision myself with iPad opening D&D Beyond Basic Rulebook while I play the physical game for quick reference. I'm sure I have said this enough times, but there are lots of data to keep track and stats to look up in 5e game. Since this was the most basic first encounter, I'm sure I had a less amount of data tracking than usual, but even such instance, I had to keep track of health for all combatants on the board, Dragon Blade ultimate power counter, status of Dragon Spirit empowerment, and turn order. Worst part is stats lookup. 5e game's versatility is driven by many stats for each character, which are modified by equipment. But this means these numbers are something we won't be able to memorize easily. In my particular case for this first encounter, I played the game using Virtual Tabletop Simulator. With Virtual Tabletop Simulator, I was able to integrate core 5e data, so all the stats of goblins and even equipments that I geared on my characters all had proper stats, and these were easy to look up whenever I needed. However, I'm looking forward to play the game physically for a better immersion with miniatures and physical grid map. This will require looking up reference to various parts of the game during combat. Without the proper supporting elements, I can see myself feeling dilution of overall game experience due to number of data lookup. So what parts of data lookup and tracking do we see Dragori Games making to help physical, especially solo game player? At the time of this recording, stretch goals mentioned about cards with classes and villain start blocks. This is a good news, as it means we will have required information right on the table for some of the monster stats. However, Dragoli Games has confirmed that not all monsters in the book will have corresponding cards, so we will have only part of the solution here. Special attacks will have card representation. I can see this allows easy tracking of a draconic power combo. In fact, Tanares RPG even takes care of challenge of multiple player character control for solo player by escort system. This is probably the most cumbersome piece of data tracking player would notice if there wasn't a system like this. I see there are all sorts of design decisions being placed here to make the game really solo playable by Tanares RPG. Basically, what I learned from this experience are 5e solo playable mode is an adventure board game. As far as the tips to those who are thinking trying this out yourself, I highly recommend starting with D&D starter kit using solo playable engine or guide. If you are like myself and if Tanares RPG got you this far, then try picking 2 Tanares RPG pre-generated characters from the sample book. Spend as much or as little time as you want to get table set up. Whatever you do in this step should pay you back. If you spend minimum time and just have a little square grids with miniatures or tokens on your table, you save setup time. If you set up virtual tabletop like I did, I felt more immersion with Tanares RPG character, but more importantly for me, it was far easier to avoid making mistakes and keep track of data this way. After all these setup, and if you go through the Goblin ambush and felt the game is not fun, then Tanares RPG 5e solo play mode isn't for you. If you see the potential, had fun, I think we are off to the good start. Tanares RPG Game Master-less mode will simply take this whole experience to a new level. After this experience, I'm excited about the game more than ever as a solo play adventure board gamer. Thanks for watching.